What I would like to see in both the next African Climate Summit and the next COP is action. So we need to move from discussion and negotiations and declaration and pledge to concrete action, to concrete finance, to concrete decision. So we, at the end, we will perhaps manage to get the objective of avoid the planet to get warmed above the 1.5 degree that is the critical target indicated by the scientists. So if I could synthesize what I would like to see in the next initiatives like this, one word: action. My name is Paulino Diaz. I'm the founder and CEO of PD Consult, and I'm an African Climate Ambassador 2023. Our consulting firm, we work with governments and international institutions in the design and implementation of public policies, including in the space that are affected by climate change. So the two reasons that prompted me to accept this invitation to become a climate ambassador is first my job, because I'm all the time dealing with the design of public policies, and I believe that it is important to get engaged in this kind of space. And the second reason is I live in an archipelago, Cape Verde, in West Africa, which is one of the most exposed country in the world to the effects of climate change. So those two reasons prompted me to give my humble contribution to this debate related to climate change in Africa. This African Climate Summit in Nairobi was groundbreaking in terms of building on a continental agenda to address and to discuss and to address these issues related to climate change. It provided an opportunity for African leaders to agree in a certain vision, to establish unified priorities and strategic objectives, and to agree also in an agenda to negotiate in other spaces with global leaders in issues related to climate change. COP is the Conference of Parties, an initiative launched some years ago by the United Nations to discuss the issues related to climate change. It's an opportunity when global leaders, civil society, and other partners and other actors meet to discuss where we are in terms of actions to address the issue of climate change, and to agree on the way forward to discuss some critical points that needs to be taken, critical actions that needs to be taken to address the warming of the planet. One of the outcomes is the fact that the African countries now can have a single agenda with a clear objectives at continental level, with defined priorities in what related not only to mitigation, but also to adaptations to the effects of climate change, and as well the management of loss and damage. For the perspective of my country, as I said, are highly exposed countries to the effect of climate change. This is important because it provides to us also a framework that we can align our internal decisions, internal policies to integrate inside with this African position, to integrate in our internal public policies. For me, one of the most important is the pledge of the global countries to create the loss and damage fund. Although the amount committed to the fund is not enough, let's put it very clear, it's not enough, but it's a step in the right direction. Now, with what we need to discuss, it's the review the amount. We need to discuss the speed to materialize the decision taken and to move from pledge to concrete action. And we need to discuss the procedures to make sure that the money will go exactly to the people who most need, who are most affected by the effect of the climate change. I believe yes. First, because it gave to the continent a single agenda. It provided a single set of priorities that can be incorporated now at the national level, aligned to the NDCs from each country. It gave us the sense of the resource that Africa possesses that can help the continent to play an important and proactive role on these entire discussions. And it gave us some standpoint from where we can negotiate with other global partners and global actors in the issue related to climate change, how Africa can be a contributor to the design and implementation of solutions to help not only to mitigate the drivers of climate change, but also to help the entire planet to adapt and to become more resilient to the climate change effects. As I said before, Africa possesses a lot of resources and the natural conditions that can play an important role in helping this planet to address the issue of climate change. And we need to find out first, we need to align the vision, a continental vision about how to explore those resources in a sustainable way while ensuring sustainable development for the African people. We need to define how shall be our position, the position of the continent in the global discussions and negotiations with other parts during the COP and other space of negotiations. For sure is access to finance. We have the resources. Now we have a clear vision about what we want, what we need in what concerns the adaptation and mitigation of the drivers of climate change. We have the will and the political support from continental level. We have a greater awareness among the population about the drivers and the impacts and the risk for the risk associated with climate change. We need finance. Access to finance is the critical challenge that, in my opinion, Africa faces to help the continent address the issue of climate change. With the right amount of finance at the right moment, in the right condition, I believe that Africa can make very strong steps toward a more sustainable and more resilient scenario in what regarding climate change. Of course, it's not easy. The continent requires a huge amount of money. Only for adaptation, it is estimated that Africa needs between 194 billion and 366 billion dollars per year only to adapt the continent and make it more resilient to the effects of climate change. But for this, we need to access this money. Nowadays, the main constraints that limits African countries to get better access, get better and more access to climate finance is the level of debt in the continent. The burden of the debt is very high. We are talking in average $70 billion per year only paying interest, and it's too high. At least part of this money could be applied to help the continent to be more resilient to the effect of climate change. A recent study from Professor Adrian Bilal from Harvard University and Diego Kanzik from Northwestern University estimate that for each additional ton of carbon that is emitted to the atmosphere, the damage associated is $1,056. And the global north, a citizen from the global north, it's responsible to emit 3 times more carbon to the atmosphere than an African citizen. This means that Africa is one of the continents most exposed and to suffer damage from climate change, but is not being compensated financially. It's having difficulties to access finance, exactly to finance the losses and the damage associated to climate change. The amount of money committed by the global countries to the loss and damage fund, less than 800 million, is clearly not enough to help the continent to finance the loss and damage associated to climate fund. So we need to look to how to solve this issue, this shortage of finance for loss and damage. First of all, we need to discuss with the global north, especially the developed countries, to take the responsibilities that they have in the climate change, increasing the amount that they are committing to the loss and damage fund. This, for me, is the first step. The developed countries need also to take financial responsibility for their level of emission in one side, while reducing their own emission. Another alternative is look at our domestic capacity to generate funds, to generate revenues, domestic revenues, to help the African countries to address these issues related to climate change. Of course, there's a lot of action that can be taken on this front, but we need to move on these combined directions. World Bank will charge estimated 24% of the loss and damage fund. I think it's too high. It means that for each dollar put it in that fund to help people finance their losses and damage related to climate funds, only 76% will be allocated to the country. When you add to this the cost of at local level, at national level, the cost of overhead and the management issues related to this influx, it means that for each dollar committed to this fund, perhaps less than half of it will reach the people that really need to finance their loss and to recover their damage after extreme events related to climate change. I think that a fair percent of management cost would be maximum 5% and not the 24% that the World Bank will receive for this proposal. For sure, left Africa in a complicated situation. As I said before, only for loss and damage needs, Africa needs between 219 and $440 billion between 2020 and 2030 only to finance the needs related to loss and damage related to climate finance. So when we are talking in a fund of less than 800 million, the gap is huge. So this lets Africa in a very vulnerable position. And because in one side is one of the most exposed continent to the negative effect of climate change. And in the other hand, it's the continent who is already facing the higher struggle to access to right finance to help them adapt and recover from those events. From the Africa perspective, those two sides, I cannot say two opposite sides because I don't believe and I don't want to pass this message that address climate change issues it will sacrifice development. I think that the challenge that we have is how to combine a sustainable development at the same time that we contribute to mitigate the drivers of climate change and we create conditions for a more sustainable and resilient continent. So the question is how we will ensure, for example, that the 600 million Africans that doesn't have access to electricity right now can have access to electricity, but from renewable energy, for example. Those are the critical questions that we need to find efficient answer for that. How we can ensure sustainable economic growth, sustainable growth of revenues for the African citizens, without put a lot of pressure on the drivers that are resulting in climate change from one side, and while preparing the continent to be more resilient to the growing negative effects from climate change. So we need to think those two aspects in a complementary way. We need to get the issue of climate change, climate adaptation, an important part of our national and continental planning philosophy and the procedures regarding the long-term development of the continent. What I would like to see in both the next African Climate Summit and the next COP is action. We had discussed a lot in the last 2 decades. We had trying to negotiate a lot. We reached some agreement at global level, but what we can see is we are lacking perhaps action. Climate change is there. Climate change is accelerating. Every day we are looking at the effects of climate change in people's life. It's not only theory in people's life. So we need to move from discussion and negotiations and declaration and pledge to concrete action, to concrete finance, to concrete decision. So we, at the end, we will perhaps manage to get the objective of avoid the planet to get warmed above the 1.5 degree that is the critical target indicated by the scientists. So if I could synthesize what I would like to see in the next initiative like this, one word, action. I'm thinking from local community leaders to country leaders, to continental leaders, to global leaders, what I would like to ask them, to encourage them is first to have a sense of urgency. We need this sense of urgency in what concerns building resilience to climate change in what concerns addressing the critical drivers that are conducting this climate change, especially the carbon emission. We need this sense of urgency at every level of governments, at every level of leadership. This is the first point. The second point, as I said before, we need action, not only to have a sense of urgency, but we need action. We need efficient action. We need rapid action. We need action that are supported also in the right set of finance, in the right set of tools and policies, so effectively we can jointly, this is something that we need to do it together. Of course, we need to be sure about the responsibilities of each part. We need to be aware of the responsibilities of the global south and the most developed countries in the carbon emission, and the responsibilities and exposure of the global south in what concerns the same carbon emission and the exposure to climate change. But we need to work on this together, because this is a planetary challenge. It's not a challenge that affects only Africa. It's not a challenge that affects only Europe or Asia or South America. It's a challenge to all of us. So we need to work on this together with solidarity, but in an efficient and speedy way with the right set of finance.